Since the establishment of the First Kingdoms around 5,500 years ago, the Syrian territory has been heavily contested over the millennia by great civilizations and powerful empires. By the early 7th century, Muslim Arabs conquered the land and introduced their culture and religion permanently to the region. Even so, Syria remained highly contested by the Byzantines, Persians, Mongols, and various Arab states. In 1516, it was conquered by the Turks of the powerful Ottoman Empire. In this video, we will explore a bit of Syria's history under Ottoman rule, during French rule, and through a turbulent and chaotic post-independence period. After defeating the Mamluks in a major battle in 1516 near the city of Aleppo, the Ottoman Turkish Sultan Selim I conquered most of Syria. The Ottomans reorganized the Levant into a large province known as Ottoman Syria, and by 1549, this territory was divided into two administrative divisions: the Eyalet of Aleppo, covering the northern part of modern-day Syria, and the Eyalet of Damascus, covering the south. Ottoman rule was not as oppressive to the Syrians as it was to other peoples. This was because, as Muslims, the Turks respected Arabic as the language of the Quran and accepted the Arabs as defenders of the faith. Damascus became sacred to Muslims due to the numerous pilgrims passing through the region on their annual pilgrimage to Mecca. In 1831, during the First Ottoman-Egyptian War, Ottoman Syria was conquered by Egypt. At that time, Syria was a practically autonomous administrative division of the Ottoman Empire, governed by the Ottoman Albanian Muhammad Ali Pasha. 10 years later, Ottoman Syria was reclaimed by the Ottoman Empire. As part of the Tanzimat reforms in the 19th century, an Ottoman law passed in 1864 introduced a standardized provincial administration throughout the empire, with eyalets becoming smaller vilayets governed by an ally appointed by the Sultan. In the early 20th century, Syria's demographics underwent a significant change when Ottoman troops, alongside Kurdish detachments, carried out an ethnic cleansing of its Christian populations. In 1916, during World War I, French diplomat François-Georges Picot and British diplomat Mark Sykes secretly agreed on the post-war division of the Ottoman Empire into respective spheres of influence, as established in the Sykes-Picot Agreement. In October 1918, Arab and British forces advanced into Syria and captured Damascus and Aleppo. Then, in 1920, the League of Nations decided that Syria would be placed under direct French control, in accordance with the Sykes-Picot Agreement. But it was at the San Remo Conference in April of the same year that the determination regarding the mandates, their boundaries, purposes, and organization were defined and ratified by the League of Nations in 1921. On June 28, 1922, the Syrian Federation was founded, encompassing the state of Aleppo, the state of Damascus, the Alawite state, and the Jabal al-Druze state. Zubhi Barakat became the first president of the country. In 1923, the League of Nations mandate came into effect, and the French mandate for Syria and Lebanon was established, also encompassing the state of Greater Lebanon. In 1925, the Syrian Federation was dissolved, and the states of Aleppo and Damascus were unified into the state of Syria. That year, a nationalist uprising against French rule led Sultan Pasha al-Atrash to lead a rebellion known as the Great Syrian Revolt, which spread across the country. This revolt was suppressed in 1927 after fierce battles between the French and rebels in Damascus, Homs, and Rameh. In 1930, the state of Syria became the Syrian Republic, with Damascus as its capital, still under French control. In 1936, the Alawite state and the Jabal al-Druze state were incorporated into the republic. Also in 1936, the Syrian-French Treaty of Independence was established between Syria and France, to guarantee Syria's independence from French authority. However, France still maintained economic and military dominance over Syria. In 1938, the administrative division, known as the Sanjak of Alexandretta, declared the state of Hatay with joint control between France and Turkey. The following year, after a referendum considered illegitimate, the state joined Turkey, becoming the Hatay province. With France's weakening in 1940 during World War II, Syria came under the control of Vichy France, a regime that was established in France and was allied with the Nazis. Until July 1941, during the Syria-Lebanon campaign, the British and Free French forces occupied the country. In 1943, the state of Lebanon gained its independence with the establishment of the Republic of Lebanon, separating from the French Mandate. On January 1, 1944, Syria was recognized as an independent country, and on October 17, 1945, it became one of the founding members of the United Nations. However, the slow pace of the French withdrawal led to protests and resulted in a French response with artillery and the occupation of the Syrian parliament in 1945. With continued pressure from British and Syrian nationalist groups, the French were forced to evacuate their remaining troops in April 1946, leaving the country in the hands of a Republican government. And with the end of the French Mandate on April 17, 1946, known as Evacuation Day, Syria officially became independent, with Shukri al-Quwatli as the first president of independent Syria and Damascus as its capital. Shortly after its independence in 1948, Syria became involved in the Arab-Israeli War, aligning with other local Arab states that sought to destroy the State of Israel. The Syrian army entered northern Israel, but after fierce fighting, it was gradually pushed back by the Israelis to the Golan Heights, and an armistice was signed in 1949. The outcome of the war was one of the factors that led to the March 1949 coup by Colonel Hosni al-Zaim. Zaim remained in power for a short time, being deposed on August 14th of the same year through another coup led by Colonel Sami al-Hinawi. Hinawi handed over power to Syrian politician and statesman Hashim al-Attasi. Later that same year, military officer Adib Shishakli led yet another coup, the third coup of 1949, in an attempt to prevent a union between Syria and Iraq. This coup kept Hashim al-Attasi in power, but established an unyielding autocratic military system. In November 1956, as a direct result of the Suez Crisis, Syria signed a pact with the Soviet Union, providing a foothold for communist influence within the government in exchange for planes, tanks, and other military equipment sent to Syria. This increase in Syria's military strength concerned Turkey, as it seemed feasible that Syria might attempt to reclaim the province of Hatay, a disputed issue between the two countries. This context also created fertile ground for closer ties with Egypt, leading to the creation of the United Arab Republic in 1958. However, this union did not work out well, as discontent with Egyptian dominance in the country led to Syria's withdrawal from the Union in 1961, when it re-established itself as the Syrian Arab Republic. On March 8, 1963, another coup took place, this time orchestrated by the Ba'ath Party, known as the March 8th Revolution. The March 8th Revolution of 1963 marked a radical break in Syria's modern history. The Ba'ath Party monopolized power to establish a one-party state and shaped a new socio-political order in Syria by imposing its state ideology. The country became known as Ba'athist Syria and was governed as a totalitarian system marked by the widespread dominance of the Ba'ath Party over all aspects of the Syrian people's daily lives. The national leadership of the Ba'ath Party was overthrown in early 1966 by ultra-leftist military dissidents of the party, led by General Salah Jadid. Under Jadid's government, Syria aligned itself with the Soviet bloc and pursued hardline policies toward Saudi Arabia and Israel, calling for the mobilization of a popular war against Zionism. Internally, Jadid attempted a forced socialist transformation of Syrian society, creating unrest and economic difficulties. However, public support for his government drastically decreased in 1967, after Syria's defeat in the Six-Day War, when Israel destroyed much of the Syrian Air Force and captured the Golan Heights. In 1970, Defense Minister Hafez al-Assad, widely blamed for the Syrian army's failure, took power in a coup known as the Corrective Movement. Upon assuming power, Hafez al-Assad quickly acted to create an organizational infrastructure for his government and consolidate control. In March 1971, a national referendum was held to confirm al-Assad as president for a 7-year term. That same year, the Soviet Union established a naval facility in the Syrian city of Tartus to counter the US base in Gaeta, Italy. In March 1973, the Syrian Constitution of 1973 came into effect, defining Syria as a secular socialist state, with Islam recognized as the majority religion. On October 6th of the same year, Syria and Egypt launched the Yom Kippur War, also known as the October War, launching a surprise attack on Israel. After intense fighting, the Syrians were repelled in the Golan Heights, and the territory continued to be occupied as part of the Israeli-occupied territories. By the late 1970s, traditional Sunni Muslims who rejected the Ba'athist program launched popular revolts throughout Syria, seeking the overthrow of Hafez al-Assad and the establishment of an Islamic government. In response, the Muslim Brotherhood, centered in the city of Hama, was crushed in February 1982, when parts of the city were shelled, leaving between 10,000 and 25,000 people dead or wounded, the majority civilians. The actions of Assad's government in Hama were described as possibly the deadliest act by any Arab government against its own people in the modern Middle East. Since then, public demonstrations of anti-government activity were heavily restricted. When Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, Syria joined the US-led coalition against Iraq in the Gulf War. This led to improved relations with the United States and other Arab states, and Syria participated in the Multilateral Peace Conference for Southwest Asia in Madrid in October 1991. In 1994, Assad's son, Bashar al-Assad, who was likely to succeed his father, died in a car accident. In 1998, Hafez al-Assad's brother, Rifat al-Assad, was removed from his position as vice president. Thus, when Hafez al-Assad died in 2000 after 30 years in power, his second son, Bashar al-Assad, was chosen as his successor. The period following Bashar al-Assad's election in the summer of 2000 saw new hopes for reform and was dubbed the Damascus Spring. This period was characterized by the emergence of various political forums or salons, where groups of like-minded individuals gathered to discuss political and social issues. However, by the fall of 2001, authorities suppressed the pro-reform movement, crushing hopes for a break from Hafez al-Assad's authoritarian past. Bashar al-Assad's reign continued his father's totalitarian practices through the brutal repression of political dissidents and the suppression of civil society movements. Political opposition remained prohibited, although Bashar al-Assad promised to undertake economic liberalization. In practice, the new policies exacerbated corruption and nepotism among Ba'ath Party oligarchs loyal to the Assad family. Syria's international relations improved slightly from 2006, with restored relations with Iraq and the relaunch of dialogue with the European Union and the United States. But an Israeli airstrike in northern Syria in 2007 was a setback in the improvement of these relations. In May 2010, the United States renewed sanctions against Syria, citing the country's support for terrorist groups. In 2011, the International Atomic Energy Agency reported Syria to the UN Security Council over its alleged secret nuclear program. Encouraged by the events of the Arab Spring, mass anti-government protests began in Damascus and the city of Daraa in March 2011, marking the beginning of the Syrian civil war. The protesters demanded political freedom and the release of political prisoners. This was immediately followed by a government crackdown, with the Syrian army being mobilized to suppress the unrest, killing hundreds of civilians. This sparked days of violent upheaval, gradually spreading across the country in the following months. Even with a peace plan drafted by the UN Security Council in 2012, the violence remained unwavering. According to the UN, over 1 million Syrians were displaced internally in the country, and more than 355,000 Syrian refugees fled to Jordan, Iraq, Lebanon, and Turkey during the first year of fighting. The Syrian Arab Armed Forces committed numerous mass killings, torture, chemical weapon attacks, and other war crimes, leading to condemnation of the Syrian government by the United States and the European Union, which imposed further sanctions on Syria. In 2015, the Hmeimim Air Base was built to serve as a strategic center for Russian military intervention on behalf of the Syrian government during the war. By 2022, over 500,000 people had been killed in the civil war, with pro-Assad forces responsible for 90% of the deaths. Around 14 million people were forcibly displaced, with nearly 7 million fleeing the country, resulting in the world's largest refugee crisis. On December 7, 2024, the Syrian opposition group known as the Southern Operations Room led forces that entered Syria from the south. On December 8th, the Ba'athist Syria, led by President Bashar al-Assad, collapsed during the large offensive by opposition forces. The capture of Damascus that day marked the end of the Assad family's totalitarian hereditary regime that had ruled Syria since 1970, and Bashar al-Assad fled to Moscow. Currently, the Syrian civil war technically remains ongoing, with about 7.2 million Syrians still living outside the country. In addition, the war has devastated the country, causing an estimated loss of about $400 billion. Syria's participation in global exports has been gradually declining since 2001. The Syrian economy has deteriorated considerably since the beginning of the civil war, and political instability poses a significant threat to the country's economic development. The main economic sources for the country come from oil and agriculture. Despite the crisis in Syria, agriculture remains a key part of the economy. The sector represents about 26% of GDP and is a critical safety net for the population. With a nominal GDP estimated at around $18 billion, Syria has the 45th largest economy in Asia and the 129th largest economy in the world. The country's GDP per capita is estimated at around $840, making it the third lowest in Asia and the 179th lowest in the world. Extreme poverty in the country, which was nearly non-existent before the civil war, now affects more than a quarter of the Syrian population. Syria's Human Development Index, HDI, is 0.557, which is still considered medium, ranking it 159th in the world. And this is the story of Syria. This Middle Eastern country, which has one of the richest histories in the world, now faces one of the greatest humanitarian crises on the planet.